welcome back to the Talk Past podcast. I, of course, am the host, NC, and we have again, of course, a wonderful friend and actor, reenactor, etc. You may introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name's Caleb. I've been friends with NC for a long time, and I'm happy to be back. I love this podcast.
Indeed, it's been like 12 years at this point, 12, 13 years.
Yeah.
Oof. Oh, of course,
Oof.
at the head of the show, obviously, internet on my end is not the best. I have no control over that. So if I go out of sync, let me know. I usually will see it down where it says voice connected. It'll go red. But if so, let me know, and then I'll stop and we'll just keep up. But that's why we have some edits in the podcast among some personal chat.
Power of editing.
Mm-hmm. On top of that, of course, I know I announced last episode the Steam Unreal Engine 5 game for the channel, the Battle of Blood Eagle. But of course, that game needs funding. So I'm doing what I can on that myself in terms of concept and getting things I can together. But I am actually forgot to announce that I am also doing a second one, which is a mobile game on using Unity for whatever mobile it ends up on. But called Tower of Champions, which I'm actually currently working on and have enough material to be posting devlogs soon. So I just wanted to put that out when the devlog comes out, and people are like, "Wait a minute, weren't you working on that?" Well, yes, in slowly, everything. But this episode will be about someone currently relevant to you doing the show that we do, King Edmund. I don't know if he has a numeral next to his name, but
he does.
Oh, what is this numeral?
So he was known as Edmund II, and his moniker was also Edmund Ironside, which wasn't given to him, but we'll get into that as we get into the history.
Mm-hmm. He certainly wasn't Bjorn with it.
Right.
But so yeah, you're currently engaged in the festival that we do among also your other project, the
it's a full contact foot tournament.
Contact.
Yes. FCFT.
And I'm not there obviously because saving up for a house, but you were recently announced as king, of course, recently as last month, announced as king of the festival on the side of the Saxons, playing King Edmund II. The year, I believe it's 11th century, right? I'm not 100% what exact year it is.
Yes, it's the early 11th century, 1016. So like early 11th century. It just yeah.
So the festival we do actually kind of rotates around or gravitates around battles rather than the people or time period. It's specifically a battle, like the Battle of Cressy, the Battle of Glenmama, Battle of Eddington. I don't remember any other ones. But what is the battle that you are portraying this year?
So this year's scenario is the Battle of Asendun, or Asendun, if you prefer to pronounce it like that. Some scholars say it's also the Battle of Ashton or Ashingdown. Either way, it was around, I think, 30 miles north of Essex, I believe. But yeah, it was the Battle of Asendun. It's a small little town, and it's where Edmund Ironside and King Canute the Great battled.
Indeed, of course, it has nothing to do with Khazad-dûm in
right.
Lord of the Rings. However, so what little to nothing I know, I did research, but it was all specifically for Kit, right? Little I know is kind of tagged from the insanely inaccurate The Last Kingdom.
Yes.
Which obviously they implant. Uhtred into all of these scenarios with Alfred and Canute and so on
Mhm.
and so forth. Um, I don't know if you've seen that season. It was season 4, I believe. Is that the same Canute we're talking about?
I
If
also
you
have
have.
not seen Last Kingdom or Vikings Valhalla. I've actually
Mhm,
actively tried to stay away from that during my research
mhm.
because I don't want any. No offense to the actors and the directors who put this on, but I don't want my accurate knowledge tainted by a Hollywood production. Um,
Indeed.
and yeah, so I haven't seen those seasons. I haven't seen those shows. Yeah,
Indeed. I stopped after season 4 because it just started getting too fantasy. But
right.
on the flip side, obviously for Alfred, I actually very very heavily referenced their version of Alfred because I thought it was a really well done and grounded interpretation. Uh,
Yeah, I have seen scenes of Alfred in the Last Kingdom, and I
mhm.
was impressed. I was like, oh wow they got this character right. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, season 1 was pretty much OP, and then it
Yeah,
kind of went downhill as it got more World of Warcraft. Um, season 3 on, but Canute in the show, he's I mean, everyone in anyone that's a Viking in media is kind of portrayed as just like power hungry barbarians.
right.
It's sort of how he's portrayed. He just wants power. He wants to have children. He wants to, be the leader of the people, basically be the Guthrum, if you
Hmm.
will, without without the settling, right? Because I mean,
Right,
technically, the Great Heathen Army, they're settlers at that point, more than they are Vikings. They're just trying to exist. And the
right.
Saxons were
And
like, "No."
as of 1016, it's been over 200 years, or little under 200 years since the Great Heathen Army was defeated by Alfred. So
Settled.
at this
Mhm.
point, they've already been settled. They already have Danelaw. They already have their Northumbria and parts of Mercia that they've been living in. So at this point, they're no longer settlers. They're part of England.
Yeah,
And so yeah, Canute in history is obviously much different than how he's portrayed in media.
yeah. I mean, hundreds of years, so obviously the one in Last King is probably not even the one. But in any case, that is also kind of a point I've been thinking about that sort of is popping up in, um, historical media, like actual
Mhm.
factual historical media. That I've watched recently a video on YouTube. It's probably a documentary somewhere, but people in some of the Scottish Isles taking genealogy tests to find out that they actually have, I hate to say Viking blood, but that they are predominantly Scandinavian as
Yeah.
opposed to Scottish. And then that shows that these people they're not obviously the Vikings are pirates. The people that came to and stayed in England, Scotland, Ireland, all the other parts of the world that they went to, they're at this point they're immigrants, they're settlers.
Mhm.
And by the time of Canute and this battle, they have every right to be where they are. I mean, they were probably born there, raised there. They know nothing else other than where they were. So
Mhm.
um, I'm sure people on cast are going to want to be pirates and showcase the Raiders version of Vikings, which is still appropriate. But how are you planning to sort of humanize and portray Canute? Not Canute, my goodness, Edmund
Edmund.
Edmund II. But maybe yes, also Canute, because you have to look at him and see him from a perspective of the king, but also
Yeah.
how are you going to portray your perspective of Canute? Maybe that's where I was trying to go with that.
Right. Well, let's see. As far as how I'm planning on portraying Edmund, I really want to portray him as a reluctant king, a reluctant leader. Well, not a reluctant leader because he's been a leader, but most definitely a reluctant king. He is a warrior first. Edmund had was thrust into this war when he was 12 years old. I mean, we can really start delving into the history, but just to give a brief background to this battle, Edmund's father, Ethelred the Unready, which
Mm-hmm.
is one of the best insults you could ever give to like a person of authority. Like
Yeah.
you're being called unready. Like that's just man, that hits hard. Anyway, yeah, Ethelred is responsible for the St. Brice's Day massacre in 1002. There had been increasing threats against his wife. Some say that those weren't even accurate because there was one fellow, Edric, which we can also get into later. There's a lot of history behind that fellow. But Edric was basically whispering in the king's ear, telling him, "Oh, hey, these Danes they're gonna take everything. They're gonna kill you." And so, after political and financial and bribing, after all those tactics that Ethelred used, he finally settled on, well, let's just kill them all. And St. Brice's Day was a day that the Danes bathed. They were celebrating. They were feasting. And so Ethelred ordered all Danes living in English territory to be killed, um, including the sister of King Sweyn Forkbeard. Her name was Gunhilda, and she was amongst the dead, and that's what set off the next 12 years of or the next 14 years, I'm sorry, of of battle, of skirmishes, of warfare. So Edmund was 12 years old in 1002.
Mm-hmm.
So he was thrust into this conflict pretty much immediately. I mean, it took some time for Sweyn to find out what had happened, but after that, he immediately started raiding, attacking, pillaging as much land and villages and monasteries as he could to get back at Ethelred.
Mm-hmm.
And Edmund was also not the only child. He was actually the younger son, the second born to Ethelred. His older brother Ethelstan, they were very close, and so they were both thrust into this conflict. So he grew up pretty much, after his childhood was done. He grew up in a war, in battle, and so he was constantly fighting. As he got older, he and Ethelstan were fighting together. They were constantly fighting together and honing their skills, swordsmanship, shield work, all that. So Edmund is first and foremost a warrior, a soldier, a fighter. And with the example that his father set, which was a very poor example of how a king should rule, I would imagine that Edmund was pretty unprepared for kingship, because after Ethelred married Emma of Normandy, she brought with her children as well. And so there's all these kids in line for the throne. They were called the heir apparent. Um, Ethelstan, Edmund's older brother, died in 1014, leaving Edmund to finally be the one to take up the crown once his father had passed. So, I mean, that's only 2 years to be like, oh, okay, I need to prepare myself to become a king. And during that time, he's fighting the whole time. So that was a pretty big, basic description of what Edmund has been going through. We can get into it more, which I would love
Yeah.
to get into the details. But so yeah, that's how I'm planning on portraying him. He's a warrior king, a warrior first, a king second. He's been in conflict for most of his life against the Danes, all because of his father. So I would imagine that there is some animosity there, and that becomes very obvious when Edmund goes against his father, rebels. But again, that's all in the juicy backstory, which I would love
Mm-hmm.
to start talking about shortly here. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's how I'm planning on portraying Edmund.
Indeed. It's a very. I know everyone kind of likes to think of the medieval period or Iron Age as just nothing but wars, as is apparently today as well. But I mean,
Yeah.
they were people that were pretty much going through mundanity of life. But you got to think of how people were raised and told, either if you want to call it indoctrinated or that's just kind of the culture of their village or kingdom,
Hmm.
but the people they were around. So him to see the Danes that way, and then also to be raised knowing that you might be king, and then suddenly you have to, and without any preparation whatsoever, aside
Right.
from literally being in the family. You know, uh, it's I can't imagine what it would have been like, but I'm sure it would have been a rush, and I'm sure he would have tried to somehow settle it, organize it in his mind, or maybe not. Maybe he was someone that, because he was always fighting and having to fight and having to defend and march. Maybe that's what he thought it was, and all he'd have to be. Some people think
Right.
that the journey's all it is, and then what do you do after?
Right.
But let's get into the backstories. Let's understand uh, Edmund and his history. Do you want to
Yes.
take us to the beginning then?
Yeah. So Edmund was born in 990 AD to Ethelred and Elfgifu, Ethelred's first wife. And Elfgifu is a name that will come up several times from different women, and it's because Elfgifu was such a common Saxon name. So just be prepared if I say Elfgifu, even though, wait, didn't Elfgifu die or whatnot? Yes, but
Yeah,
there were several Elfgifus.
and
So
nothing to do with the Gelflings of what is it? The Last Crystal? Yeah,
the Dark Crystal, yeah,
Dark
the
Crystal,
Celtics.
Last Kingdom, Dark Crystal.
Yeah, so Edmund was born to Ethelred and Elfgifu. Um, Obviously, he was the second son to them, and there's not much about his childhood up until that point. Obviously, there was some shaky foundations that his father had laid because up until St. Brice's Day massacre, there weren't many Viking raids, but there were the occasional pillagings and attacks, all of which Ethelred tried to pay off with the Dane Guild, but that was becoming expensive, very expensive. And even though he would pay the Dane Guild, there would still be attacks. And so I would imagine Edmund had a pretty normal princely life. I mean, he was raised in luxury. He took classes. He knew Latin, all the stuff that a noble household would know in the late 10th century, early 11th century. Um, and so Elfgifu, his birth mother, died in that same year, 1002. A lot of things happened in 1002. Elfgifu died. Ethelred immediately married Emma of Normandy. She was very, very powerful. I mean, she was the wealthiest woman, I think, at the time in England. Uh, so he married Emma of Normandy, and that was a bit of resentment from Ethelstan, Edmund's older brother. Ethelstan didn't
Hmm.
like Emma of Normandy because she was probably the same age as Ethelstan when Ethelred married her. Um, Edmund and Emma wouldn't have a bad relationship. It would be more amicable than Ethelstan and Emma. She would later on help Edmund form the first Fyrd, or the army, the first army that he would assemble. But in 1002, Elfgifu dies, Ethelred remarries, and Ethelred also. Oh, one thing going back, by marrying Emma of Normandy, he thought that he could politically stop the Danes from pillaging and raiding, because Emma of Normandy was of Danish descent, because the Danes, the Norwegians, settled in that part of Francia,
Hmm.
which they would become the Normans, Normandy. So he thought he could settle it politically. When that didn't work, he tried to buy them off. When that didn't work, St. Brice's Day massacre happens. So after that happens, there are sporadic attacks, raids, pillaging happening all over the kingdom. Um, and Edmund and Ethelstan pretty much go through it, and they train and they fight, and they are basically at the front lines for a lot of these conflicts. And then it really doesn't start getting interesting until, let's see, what was the date? Uh, so Sweyn fully invades England in 1013, 3 years before the Battle of Essendon. Sweyn invades, and he brings with him thousands of soldiers, hundreds of ships. They invade, I think, Sandwich, and they work their way up through Wessex, and then they take Northumbria, all that. So they do a full on invasion, to the point where they actually have to, or Ethelred has to leave. He fled to Normandy with Emma and her children and all that.
Mhm.
There were reports that Edmund had fled as well to Wales, but that wasn't true. He actually did stay in England and continued to do guerrilla warfare against Sweyn and his prince son, Canute, who will become important later. So 5 weeks after Sweyn calls himself king of all England, he dies. And the Witan calls back Ethelred. They say, hey, Sweyn's dead. Come take the throne. We want you to come back. And so he comes back, and Sweyn had left his son Canute in charge of the army. But when Ethelred comes back, he brings with him a huge army, and they defeat Canute and push him out of England. So all that happened in 1012, 1013. So now there's very, very anxious, very tenuous atmosphere in England. Ethelred obviously is not a strong king. He barely beat the Danes. He barely beat Canute. So right now it's a lot of preparations, and Edmund is continuing to train, and armies are being formed. Then in 1014, Ethelstan dies, and that's that would be a big blow to Edmund. That they were very close. They were best friends. Ethelstan does leave Edmund something special, though. He leaves him his prized sword of King Offa of Mercia, who lived
Let's put
200
a
years ago.
real quick pin on that. I wrote that down so we don't forget. But I'm writing notes as you're speaking for things to bring
Okay.
up. But as you're talking about, people perhaps should know maybe a different perspective on this. But obviously, it's always going to be a warring time. But
Mm.
they didn't have guns and SWAT armor and tactical gear and militia stuff back then. It was all tunics and chainmail and wooden or metal shields. One thing
Mm-hmm.
that kind of strikes me to think about that period of time is the size of the battles. Could be tens of people. It could be, as you mentioned, thousands of people, including ships.
Mm-hmm.
But I wrote down in regards to training, because someone like Edmund and Athelstan, Alfred, Athelred, all of the nobility, they're
Mm-hmm.
going to have professional training to fight. And even still, they may die on the field. But it kind of got me thinking about, maybe people don't realize the difference between someone who is nobility, i.e., with money, if that's
Mm-hmm.
the proper use of i.e., versus someone who is just a militia or a peasant or a volunteer, etc., or perhaps an actual, soldier in the army.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know how that's going to be portrayed in the show for the festival, but uh, it's an interesting thought to think of how people manage to survive these things, where it's literally just basically what we do for the melee, which is just like maybe at least or at most sometimes 30 people coming together to kill each other.
Right.
And how do you survive that? So it gives me thinking. Edmund, you would think, would have a very good shield. He's going to have a very good chainmail. He's
Mm-hmm.
going to have very good, if they had padded armor at that point, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Same
Mm-hmm.
thing with Athelstan. But you think about the people that wouldn't. Most people on the battlefield probably only had a sword. Well, maybe not a sword. Probably only had a spear or a staff or a wooden shield or something of
Right.
that nature. Um, the training that he would have gone through, do you think it would have? I mean, obviously, he would have had professional, but he also kind of had, I guess, on the job training. Um, do we have any knowledge of him receiving professional training, like his father hiring people to train him, as probably would have happened, or is it only indicated of just literally,
um,
we're at war. Here's a stick, buddy. Good luck.
well, we don't. So yeah, all right. Let me back up a little bit.
Hmm.
So as far as Edmund's training goes, because of his older brother Ethelstan, Ethelstan was actually. It's recorded that he was an avid collector of old weapons and armor. Basically, like what we do with their stuff now. Like we're like, oh, cool, let's collect a bunch of weapons. He was a nerd, you know. He collected old weapons and armor, and I would imagine that Edmund's training and skill in combat came from his older brother. I wouldn't imagine that his father took much stock into Edmund Ironside, or sorry, Edmund II, because he wasn't the heir apparent. He wasn't going to be king, you know. Obviously, all the children of the king are still noble and they have noble blood and they're chosen by God and all that, yada yada. But I would imagine that Edmund had training from his older brother because of what his older brother liked to do.
Hmm.
So even before they saw their first, you know, their first battle, you know, before they tasted combat, Ethelstan was older. So I like to imagine, my thinking is that they practiced with each other. They used you know, blunted weapons or wooden weapons and uh, swordsmanship and shield work and spear work and all of that.
Yeah.
Because Edmund would go on to be known as the greatest swordsman of his time. So in all 26 years of his life, he was the greatest swordsman in England, basically, that anyone had ever seen. To the point where, and we can get into this later, but some of the more romanticized tellings of the Battle of Azendune uh, states that Edmund challenged Canute to one-on-one combat in order to spare bloodshed, and Canute was not afraid, but very wary of Edmund's skill as a warrior, and he
Mhm.
initially refused, saying that it would be unfair. That may just be England's, you know, penchant for making themselves sound like the best at everything.
Sort of like
But
the
they're
knight errant tales.
right, right. But you know, there Canute wasn't a slouch. Canute was just as strong and capable. But if they go out, you know, if they make that a point to point out such a small detail, there might have been some stock in that. But yeah, so I would imagine Edmund had the best training he could receive, whether or not it was supplied by his father's royal, you know, pockets and silver with professional soldiers and guardsmen, or from his older brother. But either
Mhm.
way, I mean, he honed his skill from, you know, since he was 12 years old all the way to 26. So he honed his skill for 14 years. I mean, that's has to amount for something.
Yeah, and I mean, if
Um,
you're constantly on the battlefield, that's kill or be killed. It's not a lightsaber battle fans make where we're all dancing in a nightclub. That's a legit
right.
scenario where it doesn't matter what your training is, a lucky shot is it for you, especially in the age of no medicine.
I
Um,
mean, think of King Richard, you know, the Lionheart. He
mhm,
was a fearsome warrior, renowned for his prowess in combat, and he was killed by a boy with a crossbow. I mean,
exactly.
to survive that long is a skill in of itself. I mean, our friend Colin, you know, he loves to say that uh, a lot of these knights were more dangerous than the Spartans of Thermopylae because they outlived. If you fought in 5 battles or more, you were more dangerous than a Spartan. So I would
He leveled
imagine
up.
that Edmund was pretty terrifying on the battlefield.
Oh yeah, he leveled
But I
up.
did want to make he did level up. That's right. Yeah, I did want to make one note. You were talking about how does a peasant or a farmer survive? You know, um, after Alfred's
Hmm.
victory over the Great Heathen Army in Guthrum, he actually I forgot what the tax is called. I forgot the name of the tax, but he enacted a tax that allowed there to be fortified burhs all around the rivers of England in order to
Yeah.
prevent in order to prevent Danes from raiding. So even if they did attack a village, if they go further up the river, they're attacked by a burr, and then even if they destroy that burr, they're weakened for the next one around the corner. So a lot of the money did go into fortifications as well as England's first standing army. But the sad thing is that Ethelred was such a ineffectual ruler that that standing army at this point hasn't really been standing. Like they've been out of practice, they haven't been training, they don't have good funding. So a lot of England's forces are made up by the feared, or farmers and peasants who are armed with sickles and pitchforks and some spears,
Hmm.
maybe a family heirloom sword. But I mean, their most defensible piece of equipment would probably be a shield. I mean,
Yeah.
if you had nothing, you had a shield, basically. No helmets, no mail or anything like that. Your shield and your weapon, or just a thick padded tunic. Um, so yeah, um, that's my take on it. I believe that Edmund
Hmm.
had the best possible training at the time, and then he honed that training uh, throughout
And
years of combat.
of course, also the best possible gear, which let's go ahead and
Yes,
rotate back in to 1014 when Athelstan dies, and you mentioned handed down to Edmund II is uh, the Sword of Offa.
yes. So it was recorded in Ethelstan's will. I don't have it pulled up right now. I apologize, but I
Mhm.
do remember reading and researching that the Sword of Offa was a recorded. It could have been multiple swords. It might have been a spare sword that Offa had in his armory, but either way, it survived from 200 years, excuse me, from Offa's reign, and Ethelstan acquired it, and he passed that sword off to Edmund. So Edmund was known to use a sword that was previously owned by King Offa of Mercia, and
Mhm.
that's what he carried into battle. In many Renaissance and late medieval depictions of Offa, he was depicted with a very abnormally long arming sword. Um, Oftentimes, people consider that to be a longsword, which isn't the case because longswords didn't exist in this time in the 7th century.
Yeah.
Um, but it was a long arming sword. Every depiction I've seen of Offa shows him with a long arming sword. So I actually did, and we can talk about this when we do the
The kit. Yeah.
armor and kit episode. But I did commission a beautiful type XA or 10A arming sword from Chris Fields or Sterling Armory, and we can talk about that more in the next episode. But
Indeed.
yes, so Edmund has the sword that he has now been given by his late brother Ethelstan, and he's pretty much on his own. I mean, he continues to lead forces against the now uh, invading Canute. Canute, I believe, invades in 1015. Yes, Canute returned to England in August 1015. So only a year has passed since Ethelstan's death, and Edmund continues to fight. Canute sieges London, and Edmund fights back, pushes him away. There's a bunch of back and forth. But then in 1016, or actually rather, 1015, 1016, trouble starts brewing with Ethelred. Ethelred and his advisor Edric Strayona. Boo! Put a boo track on there because he's a terrible, terrible man. Edric Strayona is his advisor, and after Canute had left back to Denmark, Ethelred called up supporters of the Danes to London and said that we will pardon you. But there were two figures who were promised a pardon, but in fact they got something different. They were allies of Edmund. Their names were Sigfrid and Morcar, two brothers, and they were called into Ethelred's chambers, and they were promptly killed by Edric Strayona. Ethelred had all the possessions of each one seized, and Sigfrid's widow, Eldgith, or modern English translation, Edith, was taken to Malmesbury Abbey and basically imprisoned there. Edmund was rightfully so furious. I mean, those were his friends, and regardless if they supported the Danes, they were still friends. And so Edmund had just about had enough of Ethelred's ineffectual ruling, and so he goes and rescues Edith, and he calls himself the Earl of the East Midlands because Edith's family was very wealthy and they controlled a ton of power in East Anglia. So he basically in defiance of his father, he rebels and calls himself the Earl of East Midlands. He now has a wife, Edith, in 1015. And now in 1016, Ethelred dies. And I believe he died in April. He died in April, making Edmund the king. After Ethelred's death, the Witan all chose Canute as king. So there are now two kings in England. Wessex and London have chosen Edmund as their king, while the rest of England have chosen Canute. So there are now two kings in one land, and that's asking for trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So for the next 6 months, Edmund would continue to raise armies. He tried to raise one army. And this was my mistake. He tried to raise one army before Ethelred was dead, but Ethelred was sick in London. And so when the army found out that Ethelred wasn't there to lead them, they all went home. And then after Ethelred's death, Edmund decided to raise more armies. So he would start running around all of England, gathering supporters. And in fact, he was going to try to get Uhtred of Northumbria as a supporter, but Canute had killed him because of Uhtred's cowardice when his father was still alive.
Mm-hmm.
So Uhtred is no longer in the playing field. But Edmund is gathering supporters. Canute has come back with 10,000 men. That's a sizable force. That's pretty powerful, and they're all trained soldiers. They're all Jomsvikings. Vikings. Edmund has, he has several hundred trained or several thousand trained soldiers, but most of it are peasants and farmers. But he continues to run around England, gathering supporters, gathering armies, and they start battling. Canute and Edmund start fighting each other. They would fight 4 major battles. 2 of them were sieges against London. Canute tried to siege London twice, which is pretty funny because he was beaten back both times. Edmund would come back to London and lift the siege, beating Canute away, and then he tried it again, which is, to me, is quite funny that he would hey, you know what we just did? What? We sieged London. Yeah? You want to do it again? Yeah, let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
That line of thinking is pretty funny. So they would fight 2 battles at London, both which ended in Edmund's victory, and then 2 more battles which would be inconclusive because the bloodshed spilled. Neither Canute nor Edmund wanted bloodshed to be the answer. They were actually both very good leaders who looked out for their men. Obviously, they were fighting for possession of the throne and for England, but they didn't want to have blood on their hands, unnecessarily so. So 2 of those battles were called off by Canute and Edmund because of the bloodshed. Then, finally, Um, the Danes have lost men. Canute has lost a lot of supplies. The Danes are tired. They're hungry. They're in need of reinforcements, and so they start heading south, southeast. They start heading southeast towards Azendun, which is where their ships are. And Edmund hears about this, and he gathers all of his forces, which outnumbered the Danes at this point, including Edric Strayona's army, which made up a third of Edmund's forces. Edric has joined sides with Edmund, and they head to Azendun, and they set up on the hill. So Azendun is actually the ass of the hill, or the hill of asses, one of those.
Mm-hmm.
So it literally means the hill of asses, which probably is reference to donkeys. So they set up there. They have the high ground, literally. They have the numbers. They have the morale. Imagine being a farmer, a Saxon farmer, and your king tells you that the Danes are on the run. These highly trained, terrifying soldiers from Denmark and Norway are running because of you, a farmer. Your morale is like through the roof right now. You can go and grab your spade and feel like you could defeat a fully armored Viking. So even if they weren't professionally armed and trained, they were ready to fight, and they were ready to die. So they're at Azendun, and both forces clash, and the fighting begins. And the English are obviously winning because they have the numbers. And then tragedy strikes. Edric Strayona calls out to his men and tells them to leave the field, and they do. Edric leads a third of the army off the battlefield, and that opens up Edmund's left flank. Edmund is undeterred. He tells his men, "We are better off without those cowards." He turns around and says that to him. I get these sources from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, as well as the Chronicle of John of Worcester. Just FYI, I should have said that before. But these are the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is basically the Bible of medieval times, and the Chronicle of John of Worcester was written 100 years after the Battle of Azendun. So the John of Worcester says that Edmund turns to his men and tells them that they're better off without those cowards, and they continue fighting. But even though their morale is high, their numbers are low, and they start losing, and Canute eventually takes the field. So the battle does end in a loss against Edmund. And Edmund retreats. He starts to run towards Wales to try to find supporters there. Canute intercepts him, and this is where the romanticized version of history starts to take place. Some sources say that they called each other out in one-on-one combat, or Edmund called Canute out in one-on-one combat. Canute refuses because he knows Edmund's reputation and how powerful he is, but Edmund insists, and they have a battle. Some sources say that Edmund wins that battle. He breaks Canute's shield and brings the battle to a standstill, and Canute says, hey, wait, let's make a treaty. You take half of England, I'll take the other half of England, and whoever dies first, everything will go to the survivor. Some say the battle never happened, or the duel never happened. They met at the island of Olney, or Olney, and there they made the treaty. Regardless, a treaty happened, and they shook hands. They became brothers. They said that they greeted each other as brothers and friends. They gave gifts, and then they went their separate ways. And then for a month, everything was pretty peachy. But then on the 30th of November, 1016, Edmund dies. Some say it was from a disease. Some say it was from wounds he received on the battlefield. The most popular theory is that he was killed on the latrine, stabbed up with either a dagger or a spear. And most pinpoint the culprit as Edric Strayona, because he was already a traitor. So why try to make amends now? Let's just kill him. So that concludes Edmund's life. He didn't even. It's sad because he didn't have a chance to fully realize his victory, his kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
He was fighting for most of his life, and even though he loses the Battle of Azendun, he still walks away with half the kingdom. I mean, imagine being such a threat to an entire army, an entire kingdom of Denmark, that they have to give you half of the kingdom that they're trying to take, just so that you won't attack them again. I mean, that's pretty awesome. That's a pretty cool legacy to have. But yeah, that's Edmund in a nutshell. I mean, he was a warrior king. He was not old at all. He was 26. He had 2 children from Edith, by the way, both of whom would be banished by Canute. One of them was Edwin. The other was Edward the Exile. Sorry, not Edwin. It was Edmund and Edward the Exile.
Ed and Eddie.
Ed and Eddie. Yeah, and a fun fact, a year after Edmund's death, Canute would visit his grave and lay a cloak of peacock feathers over his grave to symbolize salvation. He wanted Edmund to go to heaven. He would also call Edric Streona to his chambers and basically tell him one servant who betrays a master is likely to betray another, and he kills him. So Canute was a man of honor. Canute was a man of morals, and he respected Edmund as a fighter, as a leader, as a warrior. And in fact, I mentioned this earlier, they gave Edmund the name Ironside. Edmund didn't choose that name for himself. The Danes were so impressed by his prowess in battle that they gave him the name Ironside. So,
on the matter of his death, I gotta remember here in terms of structural integrity and how things were made at that specific time, because at that time we're not in the Tudor era of these grandiose castles. We're definitely not in the leading into Renaissance era of irrelevant but yet grandiose castles. We're kind of still in, I think, maybe practical castles and motte and baileys and stuff. So for him, if he were on, it depends on where, I suppose. If he was in a castle or somewhere else, doing his business, obviously there's a hole on the bottom. But for him to, well, it depends. Do we know where his castle was? Such a weird pinpointing, but
we don't know where his castle, or at least I'm sorry, I don't know where his castle is. I haven't researched that, but there is a resting place for him, and let me see if I can find that. His death. Some people are generally accept that his death occurred in London rather than in Oxford. Henry of Huntington is the one who claimed that he was stabbed up the rear with a spear on the latrine. But he was buried near his grandfather, King Edgar the Peaceful, at Glastonbury Abbey in Somerset. The abbey was destroyed during the dissolution of the monasteries in the 16th century, and any remains of a monument or crypt may have been plundered. The location of his remains is unclear, but he was buried. So, I mean, either way, he died. A month after a pretty much I would say it was a victory for him. Because he still was able to retain part of the kingdom that he was fighting for.
Yeah.
But yes, it was a sudden death. That's for sure. Like no one expected it to happen.
He was killed in Berkeley Castle in Gloucester, if I've completely brutalized that word, or how the New Englanders say Gloucester.
Gloucester.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, not to dwell on the bottom end there, but latrines back then were very, obviously it's just a hole in the wall. There's like
Right.
you might have, depending on the period, there might be, because I want to visualize not the butt end of it, but how difficult that would be. But
Hmm.
basically there would be like a stone outcrop, assuming.
Right.
I don't know Berkeley Castle well enough, especially at this time period. And then there'd be a very small opening. Obviously, maybe they would even be great. Um, so I don't know the makeup of Berkeley Castle for height.
Hmm.
If someone could reach up like something the size of a matriculation with a
Yeah.
spear, maybe an arrow. I don't know. That's kind of a unique situation. A very very small target to aim through for something of that
Right.
nature. Obviously,
Well,
it doesn't
his
matter. Go ahead.
that romanticized version of his death was actually the inspiration for King Tywin's death in Game of Thrones after
Hmm.
Tyrion. Spoilers, sorry everyone.
Yeah.
After Tywin shoots him with the crossbow on the privy, um, and in fact, Edric Strayona was also the inspiration for Grima Wormtongue in Lord of the Rings. So this battle, this political time, from 990 to 1016, is dripping with drama, with romance, with warfare. I mean, it's a story that you don't have to change a single thing about it, and you
Mhm.
have a Hollywood story. Like
Yeah.
I would love to see this on the big screen. I would love to see a tragic hero figure like Edmund. And I wouldn't want to see Canute portrayed as a villain. The real villain is Edric. He's the real villain. He's the one who's pulling all the strings. But Canute, is fighting for what he believes in. I mean, Ethelred did start it. He did kill Danes in England unprovoked. So in Canute's eyes, he's justifying those deaths. In Edmund's
Right.
eyes, he's fighting to regain. He's fighting to repair the name of the kingship in England. He's
Mhm.
fighting for honor.
Right.
Um,
And I mentioned the
it's
death.
it's just
Oh, go ahead.
no. You go ahead.
Oh, touche. Well, I mentioned the death scenario because obviously you guys are doing the battle, and
Yes.
someone has to win. Obviously, in this
Yes.
sense, I assume Canute. But obviously, it's always interesting to see how we, as our show, interprets the endings, right?
Hmm.
So for the very first one I did, and yourself as well, the return to Avalon, which was such a gimmick,
Yes.
messed up scenario. No offense to those that came up with it; it's just very convoluted. Um,
Right.
we all just decided, hey, you know what? Whatever, let's just chill. Um, and there we
Yep.
go. And Joan of Arc with her very distinctive scenario ending, but with this one, so don't worry about
Okay.
spoiling the festival at all. Um, most of the people that listen to are doing the festival, um,
Mhm.
or in other states or other parts of the world that can't go anyway. So, how are you
Yeah.
guys going to portray the ending, or are you at all having the death of Edmund, or is it just going to be the ending of the battle, and then what? We're all going to make a treaty. We're all going to get along, sing our kumbayas and peace to the company, and then kick everybody out of the festival, or is the director and yourselves kind of planning some semblance of something for Edric, Canute, and Edmund in terms of wrapping up kind of what happened in the end with death and then the kingdom falling to Canute.
So I really wish I had an answer, but at this
Mm.
moment, I don't know. I don't know what they have planned for the second match. I did ask, and I asked the directors, and I said, "Hey, um, what's your ideas for the matches?" He said, "Well, uh," and I said, "Yeah, well, do you know about the treaty and all that, And I said, "Yeah, we do. Let's see." But I asked, I said, "What about the end? What about the king?" And they told me was that Canute would be the one standing on the field.
Mhm.
So I'm fine with whatever they have planned. I'm fine with the death of Edmund. I'm fine with Edmund gets wounded and then they have to form a treaty or something. I'm just hoping at the moment of this recording I don't know, but my hopes are that they allow Edmund to show prowess in battle, that they allow Edmund to show that he could have beaten Canute were it not for blank, insert something here. Either Edric comes and stabs him, or something else happens, and that's what forces both of them to form a treaty. But I don't know. I mean, I wish
Mm,
I knew. I wish I could. When I listen to this podcast, because I'm a narcissist and I like listening to myself. No, I'm just kidding.
indeed, indeed. Yeah,
When I listen to this podcast, I wish that this section was filled with, yeah, here's what we're gonna do. But
yeah.
unfortunately, at the moment, I just don't know.
Obviously, by the time that this airs, being the last Monday of, well, obviously, he's not going to immediately precede the show, but it will be the last Monday of this month. So you'll
Okay.
know by then, hopefully, because
Yeah.
that'll be the week that start the show.
I would hope so. I would hope we know by by that time.
Yeah, obviously, I have no input in regards to anything regarding what's going on, but I would hope that it would be equal footing and that Canute is not going to overcome you just because he's political reasons, but
That's what I hope so.
show
Yeah.
political reasons, not story wise. Um, Considering it sounds as though they are both equals, and they both wanted to be equals, and they wanted to end as equals, and they did end
Hmm.
up ending as equal kings. Both one side of the same coin. So I
Right.
think that is what should be portrayed, but I have no say in anything. But we'll see once we do our gear episode, which will be the end of October. Um,
Hmm.
October, November, never mind. So the end of the gear episode will be the one that precedes the show. I'm clearly getting my months messed up. So
I was
this
about to
one,
say, I was like, wait, hold on. This one's
yeah.
going to air
So you'll
at the
know
end of this month.
you'll know by the time we do the gear episode, and then we'll
Yes.
come back to this and kind of regale that. But as
Okay.
an aside,
Cool.
but beyond that, so just a little bit in terms of portrayal,
Hmm.
because this is a festival. This is quote unquote Hollywood. Um, we are having anachronism because we have to, and we are having sort of interpretations because sometimes historically we don't know. So
Right.
instead of historically accurate, we have historically adequate, which I love that phrase, which I got from somebody in the CosTube community. I forget your name. Apologies, but thank you for that beautiful word. Um, so I don't know who's involved in the festival at the moment, besides maybe like 5 people that you'd expect to.
Hmm.
But who are the characters that we know now that there's casting that are prominent on your side?
So on my side, there's Queen Edith, or Eldgith, and she is being played. Am I allowed to say names? Is that okay?
If you want to, you could do a first name.
Okay. She's being played by Cameron. She used to do Bay Area Renaissance Festival for a couple
Okay.
years. She's a newcomer to this show, to Sarasota Medieval Fair, but I mean, she knocks it out of the park.
Hmm.
So I'm very excited to be working with her. We've been in contact. We've been sharing links and resources and costuming. Yeah, so yeah, she's playing Queen Edith. My wonderful fiance, Catherine, is playing uh, Queen Elfgifu, which was Canute's first wife. They were married by a handfast, so they were not recognized as a Christian marriage when Canute took the throne. That's why he had to marry Emma of Normandy in a traditional Christian ceremony. So Canute actually had two wives at one point. Um, but that's not happening in this scenario. He just has one wife, and that is Queen Elfgifu, who is from a Northumbrian family, who were Saxons, but they supported the Danes, and they hoped that by marrying her to Canute, they would gain wealth and power, which they did. So she is playing Queen Elfgifu, and the wonderful Jacob, or Jake, is playing Canute, King
Hmm.
Canute the Great. And I
And I
am.
suspect that will be a very interesting casting.
Mhm.
I assuming I'm able to get tapes of the show. I'm interested to see how he portrays it. I'm pretty sure I just cut off, correct?
No. I've been hearing
Okay,
you.
okay. We'll be interested to see how he portrays that because he's normally no insult to him because I'm trying his talent, but he normally is kind of typecasted, or plays kind of himself. So
Hmm.
I'm interested to see how the two of you work together in the dynamic of Edmund and Canute. Obviously, we've seen you as a in the King role, as well as roles that are similar to this. So I know you'll do.
No, I'm very excited for that, and that's actually one of the reasons why he was casted, because the directorship wants to see him break out of that mold, that ground fighter, desperate fighter, the sometimes the yes man, sometimes a prince, but who's always kind of in the shadow of the king. Um, and not to say that his acting is bad at all, but he has been typecasted.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people get typecasted in the show, and sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes people just have their strengths, and that's okay. But there are times, like with our friend Colin, he wasn't given a role for quite a long time due to silly reasons. I'll say
Yeah,
that. But once he was finally given a lead role, I mean, oh man, he took
owned
it
it.
and ran with it. Like
Yeah,
he owned it. Like he should have been there all along. So
I
I'm
I had
excited to
I
see
had no
Jake.
sorry, I had no say in the matter, but I do remember having a conversation with the director at the time,
Hmm.
really trying to push Colin as the king role for Joan of Arc
Yeah.
because same situation with me. I was very vehemently typecasted. People like to push me in a role that they think me as a person that I am, which is
Yeah.
not the case. I am an actor above all things, and I want roles that challenge my talent as an actor. I don't want to play Rumpelstiltskin every year. I don't want
Right.
to play what you think who I am personally are every year is whatever every year. I
Hmm.
wanted a role like Vlad the Impaler, a role like Alfred, a role like someone Jara would receive, a
Yeah.
role like someone yourself or Colin or Brandon, or someone given an important role that I don't want to be offensive, but might typically be like a boring role because it's
Yeah.
important just kind of giving you're moving the story around. It depends on the person to add personality to that role, but generally it's more of a story role, right? You're an important
Right.
character. You either have exposition or that you're a plot turner, and it's up to the person to bring it to
Yeah. I mean, I'll say this. I went to the director of the
life.
show. Oh, you cut out again.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No worries.
um, I'll be honest. I called the director of the show several months ago. I think back in June, and I said, "Hey, look, um, I want to be Edmund, or at least I would like to be considered to be Edmund. I
Yeah.
have been researching him. I think I could bring a really good presence to the character, and I just want to be known that I'm interested in this role, because a lot of times people think that, yeah, that royalty roles or noble roles are really boring because you're stuck to a schedule and you have to go around the site and go to the joust and the opening
Oh
gate
yeah.
and
No, I
whatnot.
loved it. I loved it. I love doing that.
I love it too. I did that with 2015. I did that with I was he was Robert the Bruce and I was Walter Stewart, and I was his court all day, and it was so much fun. And then I didn't get to do that again until about 2019, in which I played Jean d'Orléans, and I was with Joan of Arc's group, and I was doing the court stuff, and I'm like, this is so much fun. I love to play. Don't get me wrong, NC. I love to play, and I love to do bits, and I love to make improv characters and be crazy and be the weird guy in the corner who like rummages through the trash and pulls out
Yeah.
a turkey leg and sticks it on your head. I love doing that. But I also really like having that presence, having that I am this character and I need to become this historical character.
Yeah. For
And
me,
if that
go ahead. Sorry. Finish yourself.
oh I love becoming that historical character. And so last year, when I played John de Graham, a Scotsman, I was able to do a little bit of that, but it wasn't super like I had to stick to a schedule. I could go around and play. I could go to the joust if I wanted to. But I really wanted a challenge. I really wanted to be able to basically not have time during the day and still
Yeah.
try to maintain an interesting character. I think that's a really cool challenge to have. You know, you don't have time to play, you don't have time to do bits, but you have to still make your character interesting to your audience. And I think
Yeah.
that's what I want to achieve this year.
Yeah, for me, it was the challenge as an actor, playing a role nobody thought I could do.
Right.
Um, and having the responsibility, not being in control of anything. Obviously, if you're a king, you have no hierarchy. You know, you're not better
Right.
than someone who's playing a peasant. You're not better than a general caster. You just have more responsibility in the sense that you have more on your plate to
Right.
do, right? So I enjoyed having more responsibility for the festival, you know, doing the joust, calling the board. I loved
Mm,
calling the board. My favorite thing about that, quite honestly. But
yeah.
also,
I'm looking forward to that a lot.
I loved giving back. You know, that year, both on the board and in the joust and out in the fields, you know, I let a lot of newcomers and veterans that are shy or weren't otherwise allowed to have a say to speak up. You know, I took people that never were allowed to or never did get to see a joust to the joust because I don't
Yeah.
care. You know, these are their memories. This show is about memories. It's not about, you know, some sort of weird elite gargle. It's about making memories for ourselves and making memories
Yeah.
for the fans, you know, our guests or patrons or whatever you wish to call them, our
Yeah,
family.
that's what it's like the
So
memories being made.
yeah, so I loved being able to be someone who could not have the power, but have the ability to be on the board and say to every person that I felt like, whether they had a fight or were getting called or whatever, you know, just turning to someone like Tina and just having a very brief conversation on the board, just for no reason, but because you know what, why not, you know, or
Yeah.
Sam, or other people on the opposing side as well. You know, I had conversations with opposing people too. It's all about us playing together and everybody being able to be their character and showcase what they are comfortable showcasing. And I really am excited to see how Jake does with that because I'm glad he is being allowed to step out of the mold that they put him in and out of the shadow of his friend, a beautiful, wonderful friend. But all the same, they're kind of paired together a lot. So it's sort of a typecasting. So I'm excited to
Well,
see what he does with it.
well, to give you some good news, they're actually not going to be on the same side. So
Mm.
his friend is going to be on my side. So Jake is going to be pretty much left to his own devices, which I think is a recipe for something awesome.
Imperative.
Yeah.
Imperative. You know, when I was Alfred, I was left to my own devices, or I had our director. But
Hmm.
there was that weird dynamic where some people didn't want to be Saxon. And I'm sure maybe you feel that this year. I don't know how it is this year because
No,
a
I wanted to
lot
be Saxon.
no, I
Straight
mean
up.
in
Like
terms
I
of the overall group because a lot of
Oh,
people wanted to be
yes.
Viking.
Yeah,
And
and I could speak on that as far as like, pants wearing and wimple wearing and no one wants to play a Christian and whatnot, but I can that's a topic for another podcast
yeah, I mean
potentially.
it's just a show, you know, but we cycle through these. This is speaking directly to cast members. So definitely recommend this specific podcast and the one I did with the Bruce and our director about the
Yeah,
fleeting. But anywho, recommend this episode to people on cast. But this is to all of you.
absolutely.
Shows recycle. You know, what is this? One show after already having done a Viking show that we're doing another Viking show. It was
2018. 1921, so 2 years after a
Yep.
Viking show. Yeah,
And then, of course, 2010, we did King Arthur, and then we did King Arthur again. So
yep,
scenarios recycle. I mean, there's so much to choose from, but we also pander to what restraints the producer gives us.
yeah,
So if you're not Viking and you want it to be Viking, well, hey, you know what? Do what Tina and Kat did and just play a Viking. There
yeah,
were, or quote unquote Viking, right? There were Scandinavians, or in this term, Danes, on both sides. And
right,
don't let the restrictions, or what you think are restrictions, restrict you. Portray what you want to portray. But also, if you legitimately cannot be the role that you want to be, it's okay. Take what you have, run with it, make it the best bit, make it the best character of the year. But understand, we're coming back to this. You know,
mm,
um, when I come back, uh, uh, and when we recycle scenarios, we're going to redo Scottish. We're going to redo Viking. We're going to redo Normans and Arthur and this and that. So there's always going to be chances for you to shine, chances for you to be king, queen, king to take the king spot. So if this year is not your year, it's okay. Just make the best of it. But for my year in 2018, there was a lot of issues with people that wanted to be Viking and were not happy with being Saxon. And guess what? I don't control the festival. It's not my job to be the cheerleader of the side. I'm going to do what I can to convey that message that I just said, but
yeah,
it's up to the directors to be like, it's just a show, right? Um, and if you already decided you're not going to be involved, then that's on you. But um, my way was giving people a chance to speak up, speak out, be their characters when if it was any other person, they would not have been allowed to, whether willingly or just because as a king, we tend to be focused on what we're supposed to do.
right,
We might not have the foresight to be like, hey, what about, Nat? They're hidden in the corner. Maybe she doesn't have a fight this year. Let's give her a moment anyway, on the board. So, find ways to make it your own. Find ways to rebel against the directors. Find ways to rebel against the producer. Don't bury the show. I'm not saying to bury the show. I'm not saying to
right.
disrespect the show. Like one year, someone using a sword like a horse and say, "Let's swallow, come," or whatever. The South Park episode
Yeah,
COME, which is why I'm going to keep it in the show, the podcast. Don't be
yep,
that guy. But if you have an idea that is safe to play, and not me being the hyper religious slash antichrist character, don't be me. But if
yeah.
it's something safe for the show, but it's not at the will of the directors, I don't care. Do it. Do it. Uh,
Do
be
it.
bold. Make memories and show that you are an actor. Show that you deserve that spot, because that's you know put yourself over. That's the whole point of doing this.
Because they look at that stuff and they take it. I mean, they are watching and they are listening.
Yeah.
I was told this after the fact, but they had already casted the kings and queens in December.
Hmm.
Like they already know who they're going to pick because of how they see people act over the course of each show.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't.
and while
I
they may
don't.
not
Oh, go ahead.
while they may not tell you right away, I mean they already have an idea. And so if you feel like you were looked over, keep trying. There's
Yeah.
there's always next year. The show is never going away.
So I don't feel this is a hot take. I think this is an honesty, um, that everyone would agree with. But obviously, we mentioned in the discords that here on the channel and such. But our show is a precasted show, which I
Mm,
don't agree with. But it is a precasted show. I mean, I've seen people cast their fights years in advance. I've seen the previous director cast kings years in advance. I broke my back trying to showcase that I wanted to play Vlad the Impaler. Obviously, the next year was
mhm.
Alfred year. We know how that went. But I worked my butt off to show that I could play a role that isn't what they think I can play, and that I can fight and this and that. And I was given platitudes and told, "Yeah, we'll consider you," even though the role of Vlad was already cast to someone that whom I love dearly, that I would take a bullet for, but I personally don't believe would have done justice to that character,
Yeah.
just because of how they act. But I do think that they deserve a chance too. But that's just personal opinion. They could have blown me away. It don't matter. We're never gonna do Vlad. But
Yeah, that's
um,
been made clear. Yep.
yeah. So our show is a precasted show, but I've noticed that they still make changes depending on people wowing them, right? Like during the second King Arthur year, they were trying to siphon me, as well as in the Joan of Arc year. Let's do Joan of Arc. They were trying to siphon me into a very specific role, and I noticed this.
Hmm.
And it was a role I would have done just fine with. It was the one that Jeremy ended up taking.
Yes. Yep.
The child killer.
Yeah.
I saw they were trying to siphon me into that to see how I would do. The problem is they gave me someone who was not a very good actress. Granted, she was a child. Nothing wrong with her.
Yeah.
She was just being a kid. But she wasn't taking it seriously. She was very difficult to work with. She's a kid. It's okay. Had they had me strictly working with Dan's kids, maybe it would have come out differently. But I
Yeah.
noticed they tend to change their directions based on one, and please take note, people of the cast who are listening to this, because this is what the director said in our episode about literally SMF is he's looking at how comfortable are you? How comfortable are you out on the field? How comfortable are you in character? How comfortable are you fighting? That is the biggest thing that they're looking for. How comfortable are you in your skin or the skin of your character? I think that is the most important thing to take. Obviously, it's too late at this point. It's end of September. Everybody's been cast. Think of it this going into the show, and think about this for next year, when I'm back, and so on and so forth. But you know, be think about. I'm already losing my track here because of that. I don't think it's a hot take to say that it's precasted, and that because they do change their minds based on people that wow them. So
I
seeing
agree.
him take on a role that he otherwise would never been given in previous direction, maybe I love our previous director again. Take a bullet for him, but I mean, he had very specific things that he liked. He had his niche things,
Right.
right? Just as we're gonna find out what the niche likes and dislikes of our current director is in Assistant. Um,
Right.
but I'm seeing that they do change their mind based on how comfortable you are. So think about, instead of, well, why didn't I get cast? What can I do to do this? And instead think of, how can I get comfortable doing what I'm doing? There've been people who have been cast that I've disagreed with casting, getting a feature fight that clearly did not know how to fight.
Yeah.
It clearly did not know how to act, but yet were comfortable in the role that they were given, that they still owned it. So you may disagree with certain things, or you may agree, or you may not know why. I'm telling you, it's all about comfort, and it's all about you going back to the idea of rebelling against the directors and owning the show, owning your character. It's all about you taking the stand and putting yourself over. You need to put yourself over because nobody else is going to do it until you get a feature fight. Obviously, that
Right.
changes once you have a feature fight. Your job is to put your partner over, and your partner's job is to put you over. But once the fight's over, then it's whatever. Assuming, I don't know what you think about that, but yeah, out in the lanes, put yourself over. In the show leading up to your fight, put yourself over. But when it's in your fight and you're working with your partner, it's all about putting each other over, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Touche, touche. Uh, I kind of took the stand there. Your thoughts?
No. Yeah. You know, I feel like the new direction that we're having is it allows for more. honesty and allows for more openness. People people can, I can call the director and say, hey, I want to be this character. And not because I'm expecting it, not because I feel like I deserve it, but he'll listen and he'll take it into consideration. Whether or not I was precasted or not, I had the comfort to, I felt comfortable enough to call him up and say, hey, I feel like I could do a good job of this character. Previous director,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have dreamed of doing that. So yeah, I feel like the new direction is awesome. Yes, I agree with, put yourself out there, do the best you can in any role you're given. I mean, we're actors. I mean, first and foremost, we're actors. We're not fighters. We don't actually fight. We dance. We put something together. And to do that, we have to act like we are in
Yeah.
harm's way. We are in danger. So acting is first and foremost. So if you hone that, I mean, that's the best skill you can have, in any show, any production. Obviously, people are going to tell you, acting 101 kind of thing. But improv is a whole different beast. So it's okay. I mean, it's okay to feel nervous. It's okay to feel, like you're not, like you can't match up with, some of the wit that we have out here, which sometimes can get kind of, samey. But
Yeah.
I digress. But don't feel intimidated. There are people out here who care about the show and who care about acting, and we want to see this show
Grow.
thrive,
Yeah.
especially grow. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
So
at
yeah,
this point for
absolutely.
me, I'm less about the show growing because we kind of have our spot now. It's kind of established.
Right.
I want to come back and help people grow. I want to
Yeah.
see new people grow. I want to get to know the new people. This is a side of me y'all never saw because I have social anxiety. I have, personality issues and identity issues and all that stuff, shyness, whatever. I'm pretty sure I came off as a very arm's reach kind of person a lot of the time,
Mhm.
which is also me. But having done the 10 years of the show, I want to come back and be costume director. I want to come back and help people get out of their shell and help people understand the show, understand themselves as actors, understand history. I want to come back and help. I want to come back and guide. I don't care if I get a fight. I would love to do King again, but I don't care if I get a fight. It's about making sure everyone else is comfortable being themselves and being their characters. And that's what
Yeah.
I want to do. I want to be a teacher. I want to come back and help be a teacher. And that's what I spoke to the
Same.
director about. I don't want to just come back and be, obviously name Nick, but I don't want to be Nick that they think of. I don't want to be Rumpelstiltskin. I don't want to be the dude sitting in the rocking chair making, catty comments that are hilarious and on point, but make me seem like I'm a negative or out of reach person.
Right.
I'm
You want to be the guy that people can come to and say, "Hey, how does this costume piece look? Hey, I
or
need help with some of the history,"
yeah,
or you
or
know,
hey, let's get to know each other.
yeah, that too.
I'm a very affectionate person to the people I care about, and I'm very. Oh, my cat's yowling. I'm very high standard, but I want to see people grow and get better. So that's what
Yeah.
I want to do when I come back. So producer can deal with the show, and I think we as a cast should focus on us as a cast. But
Yeah.
um, oh, now that I open the door, she don't want to come in. Um, Here she is. All right, so now we've kind of run over. We've had our talk about Edmund the Second, the topic
Mhm.
here of this episode of the Talk Past podcast, as I always weirdly enunciate. Um, Closing thoughts, either on the show that we're about to get into, or Edmund, or anything you want to say.
Oh boy, on the spot. My closing thoughts. I wish everyone luck. I'm really this cast is some of the best energy I've ever seen in a long time.
Mm,
Even with some of our regulars missing,
yeah,
there's a really positive energy. Everyone's excited to do it. Everyone's ready and chomping at the bit to do it. So I'm very excited for the 4 weeks in November, the 4 weekends in November, when we get to go out there and just play, regardless of scheduling, regardless of, oh, I have to be here and I have to be there. I am just I'm just excited. I'm
Mhm.
filled to the brim with excitement, and I'm glad that I can do it this year in a role that I wanted to do. It's basically a dream role. I know it was only announced 9 months ago, but to me, this is a dream role. I get to play a character who, is pretty heroic. I mean, there's no good guy or bad guy except for Edric. Canute and Edmund aren't hero and villain. They're actually mirror images of each other, and I can get into that when we talk about Kit. But I will say this: Jake and I are going to be wearing opposite. Like I'm wearing red and blue, and he's wearing blue and red.
Mhm.
It's actually pretty clever the way we figured it out. But yeah, so I'm excited. I believe everyone, no matter what role they're given, I think they're going to do great. And yeah, I'm just excited. I'm actually really excited now to talk about uh, the gear and costuming and
Yeah.
armor and weapons and stuff. But that'll be for next time.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah,
My closing thoughts obviously just gonna pertain to the channel. This is the end of September. Y'all are heading into your last month of rehearsal for October. Obviously, the end of October will be our gear talk. After that, maybe for December, I want to do an episode with a bunch of us veterans,
yeah,
maybe some new people, maybe some first years, to talk very specifically about our experiences in reenactment. You know, the day of a rehearsal where everybody's just sitting around being lazy, talking about what to expect, stuff
yeah,
like that. Probably the worst day of rehearsal. But I want to do a panel episode where we get five of us, however many we can get, at least, or at most five, uh, to as veterans and maybe one or two newcomers to talk about things in reenactment that we have learned, things that are going to help newcomers as well as veterans. Specifically, an episode as a guiding hand to new people, something as a foresight that we can pass down knowledge to. So people that don't do our show but still do reenactment in SAC or SCA, sorry, SCA, or other shows, Renaissance festivals, medieval festivals, so on and so forth. Uh, can listen to and learn from. So I would like you for that episode. Uh,
absolutely.
maybe we'll try to do that for December, if not January. Obviously, we'll do the gear talk, which will air next month. But regarding the channel specifically, obviously there's a Kofi. The Kofi is going to be tagged at the end here.
Mhm.
I'm not going to link it because I can't memorize that kind of stuff. But if you want to support the channel, it's just a $5 tier. You get access to the Discord. It'll help us build the games for the channel, the Tower of Champions as well as Battle of Blood Eagle, and it'll help us with the filming series. It'll help us create or buy gear for us that do the show. Because I want to be someone that provides gear, kit, whatever to everybody too. If someone wants Sterling or BKS, just there you go. I don't want someone to go without a sword or shoes.
That's
Importantly,
really
right?
smart. Yeah,
Um, Obviously, those devlogs for the two games. Tower of Champions is going to start in October. I've got the week off as of this recording. I've got 5 minutes of devlog already recorded, which is nothing more than just right now I'm doing graphics for Tower of Champions. I'm doing the GUI. So what you see when you start up the game, the buttons that you press them,
mhm.
and then you'll see me put that into Unity and activate those buttons and get started. Um, that'll be the first devlog for that. Um, Battle of Blood Eagle, which is much more involved. It's Unreal Engine 5, realistic graphics. I'll be able to scan all of us in that want to be inside the game, um, that I need funding for. So there's things I can do myself, but ultimately that needs funding. So that's going to be a Kickstarter game. Um, but I want to close specifically for you. So you also lead as we mentioned earlier, the FCFT. The
Full contact foot tournament.
Yes, I'm bad at
Yes,
anagrams.
that's okay.
Full contact foot tournament, which y'all need to be doing some shows as well. Um, But of course, you guys have your own Instagram. If you want to plug everything that you got for that.
Yes, yeah, you can find us at the FCFT on Instagram. You can also find my own Instagram, Caleb's_cosplay. I'll be posting a lot of my gear acquisitions and swords and costuming updates for Edmund Ironside. You can also find me getting stuff for full contact stuff. I've got a 14 gauge great helm. I have a longsword fetter that I use for striking. A lot of fun stuff. Obviously, we couldn't do any practices or meetups during rehearsal time, but once December hits and January is here, we're going to start meeting up again, and hopefully we can have a show in 2024 in Hogtown. So keep an eye out for updates on that. We'll definitely want to meet up as a group and have a podcast on that topic. But that'll be probably next year, sometime in either February or March or whatever.
Indeed. Obviously, my plan is to come back. It's always to save money and come back, but the economy. So if that doesn't happen, I'm going to just straight up buy 100 acres here and do my own festival and siphon all of you guys up here with the lure of free homes. But obviously, if that were the case, obviously we can live on 100 acres. But I would definitely hire you guys for the first show.
Well, thank you.
So that'll wrap up this episode. Obviously, in October, we're going to do I suppose we'll title it How to Collect and Research Historical Reenactment Kit Gear.
Or How to Armor Up.
Mm-hmm.
Or something like that. Yeah.
So obviously our journey of becoming King Edmund II. That'll be October. Maybe we'll do the panel episode in December or January. But until then, that is that for this episode. Thank you, Caleb, if it's okay to call you Caleb.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Caleb. Obviously, you're a dear friend and will always be welcome here. But that'll be that.
It's always a pleasure to do these recordings with you. So take care, and I'll talk to you soon.
Bibbidi-bop.